This week on Great Chat, who else remembers product review sites? CNET, ZDNet, PCMag, I can't keep up. Today, when new products and companies are born every hour and AI models are updated rapidly, it feels like a full-time job just to keep up with what's happening. This is a strong case to bring back product review sites. A quick reminder, each week we answer your questions. Don't forget to submit them at anothergreatchat.com.
Hey guys.
Hi.
Nice backdrop, Sally.
Thanks. I'm at HumanX today and then heading back to San Francisco. It feels like a reunion out here. Angela, what are you watching this week?
Well, this week is all about what's happening in the public markets. Stocks have been very volatile given everything around the tariffs and all the whipsawing around the tariffs. And I also just saw a Wall Street Journal headline that this week is the 25th anniversary of the NASDAQ peak. So we're 25 years from the dot-com bubble bursting, and it just felt really relevant both in terms of the stock market due to the tariffs, but also we're starting to see companies file S1s again. So we talked about CoreWeave last week, Hinge Health filed, and it's just interesting to see activity maybe start to pick up against a pretty difficult backdrop.
This week is also the 5-year anniversary of the San Francisco COVID lockdown. So I feel like that's been, yeah, I know. It's like, it's the before times was
New York-
everything 5 years
New York
ago.
too. I remember on Friday the 13th, 2020 is when it felt like everything in New York shut down and we shut our all Glossier stores. I was running comms at Glossier at the time. And on Thursday morning, we made the decision we needed to preemptively close and then had everything communicated by that evening. And it was such a weird whirlwind moment because I'd been working on the phased crisis plan where it was there was a phase 0 and a phase 1 and we leapt ahead to phase 5, which is no one ever comes into the office again. We're fully remote. We're sending daily newsletters to our teams with COVID updates. So,
well, I was in the newsroom. I was the executive editor at NBC overseeing business and tech. And next to our unit was the health unit. And I remember a few weeks prior, Susan, who ran the health unit, was like, hey, there's this virus that we might want to track. And then the Friday came along and I remember saying there's no way in hell that broadcast can go remote. Obviously that's completely changed and the business model has completely changed. But also going back to Angela, your note on the NASDAQ. NASDAQ actually was the first internship I had when I was at CNBC. So I had a desk there. I think there was also Figma had filed, or they're in talks with bankers about trying to go public again. So that's also going to be interesting. Figma, I think it was 2 years ago that they were going to get acquired by Adobe for $20 billion. And then there was the EU disbanded that deal. And so I don't know, there's now such a backlog and jam of all these companies. And what do you do with that?
And it's not just venture. I mean, it's across private equity as well. And I saw a headline from the Financial Times that said that this was the first year that the private equity industry has shrunk since 2005. And I think it's similar dynamics where LPs are getting pretty frustrated with the huge backlog of companies that can't go public. And so what do private equity firms do? They sell the same companies to each other, which generates liquidity for that firm, but LPs are generally LPs across a bunch of firms, so LPs don't benefit from that at all. So it feels like a very difficult environment, but it's also interesting because Helen, I think at one of our dinners, all the VCs have decided they want to become middle market private equity managers because VC is feeling so squeezed, but there's no safe space anywhere. Private equity is being squeezed similarly, and everyone really is looking for an outlet in the public markets. And people were quite hopeful that it was going to be the second half of 2024 last year. And then as we went into 2025, things were looking good. And now the markets are quite choppy. So whether it's Figma or CoreWeave or Hinge, it'll be really interesting to see how the market reacts.
It might actually not be a bad time to be in a small early stage fund, because I think the new liquidity path for that cohort is selling into some of these bigger rounds. So I saw a fast follow Cursor round rumored to be valued at $10 billion. And if you, my fund was not, but if you were lucky enough to be a pre-seed or seed investor in that company, you're probably selling into this round, maybe keeping a little bit in case it goes crazy. So There are some folks who are getting liquidity, and I think especially since LPs tend to not be backing both like massive multi-stage funds and like tiny emerging funds, there might be some folks who are happy, but yeah, it's 2025 is not what people were hoping for so far.
I saw this chart yesterday that showed like the number of $500 million exits over time, and how they
Ooh.
stay relatively static, except the exception being 2021. But the amount raised, right, average amount raised by venture funds, and that continues to just go up and to the right. So there's got to be some sort of reckoning point, and it feels like we're in that point now, because I think the point that the chart was sort of making is like the number of $1 trillion outcomes there need to be in order for like this to make sense for the amount of venture capital raised for a lot of these funds. Is quite high. And so I think just like, that's actually been sticking in my head. It's like, okay, do we think that this is a $1 trillion outcome? How many $1 trillion companies are there? And so, yeah, I mean, it feels like there's change happening in venture, which I feel like we talk about every week. I think it's because it's true. There has to be some sort of reckoning or sort of, contracting that needs to happen in order for this to work.
Well, speaking of charts, like as we were talking about Cursor, I feel like I've seen so many iterations of like fastest company to reach 100 million of ARR charts, and the lines I think were kind of far apart. Helen, to your point, like in prior decades, and then now in the age of AI, all the lines are bunched together because so many companies are reaching scale really quickly. And I think for Cursor, one of the interesting dynamics is because the product works so well, developers themselves are willing to pay out of pocket to use the tool versus waiting for their company to pay for it. And so, Ashley, I think this is something we were talking about. It's like almost like the consumerization of enterprise, which is driving this crazy accelerated ARR growth.
Totally. It's fascinating from a marketing perspective. And also maybe we can spend some time there. Helen and I did a panel on startup marketing last week at a True Ventures event, but also just from an investor perspective, how do you even think about like what qualifies as like healthy ARR? And I'm not going to give credit to the right person for this, but someone dubbed it ERR, exploratory recurring revenue, because these like consumer curiosity budgets, like they're much easier to deploy, but also the second the next shiny thing comes along that's like a little bit better, people are pretty quick to move on.
I mean, it feels like there's so much happening. It's like hard to even keep up. There's like everything going on in the AI coding space with Cursor and all the developers on Twitter talking about the different tools and what they can build with the different tools. Then, Anthropic, we talked about release Claude 3.7 last week. And then over the weekend, there was almost like a second DeepSeek debate with Manus being released. It's just impossible to break through the noise and figure out how to use these tools, what these tools are good for. And to your point, Ashley, like it must just be a marketing nightmare.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have a maybe like a narrative violating take that this is actually going to be great for a subset of journalism. I was scanning Tech Meme yesterday or the day before, and a couple of the headlines, one of them was like actually a link to a tweet where someone had broken down the differences between Claude Code and Cursor, and had like done the work of sort of comparing those two solutions. And his take was actually Claude Code was better. So, right on the heels of this Cursor funding round news. And then on TechCrunch, there was a headline about Manus where the author, Kyle Wiggers, had, sort of gathered opinions from all over the internet, both people who were like, oh my gosh, this is like the next like DeepSeek moment agent that is changing the game and can do incredible things. And then other people who were super skeptical. And then he went and he used it himself. And he tried to get Manus to first like order him a chicken sandwich from a nearby restaurant and then book a flight and then like code a simple gaming app. And it failed all those tests. And it made me think like, I think there could be a real revival for product journalism and product reviews. And of course, it's going to look different in the AI age, but with all of these, like every week, we're sort of bombarded by either new products or like updates to existing products. And, so many people have so much skin in the game. You don't know if they're talking their book or just like observing something objectively. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we return to like, another like a renaissance for a category of journalism that really hasn't been interesting since, I would say, like the early 2010s.
Oh, heck yeah. So my first job out of college, I worked at an advertising agency, and my clients were AMD and Hitachi Data Systems. Pretty sweet.
Yes.
I did not know
And
that.
yeah, so very, very familiar with like the CNETs and PC Mags and, all of those publications, like Tom's Guide. Like we were advertising in those. And so I actually just looked them up. They're still around, and maybe we'll see a big resurgence.
I worked really closely with Walt Mossberg, who obviously is a legendary product reviewer. Ashley, I know you know him
Yeah.
really well as well. And so when we were at CNBC, anytime there was a new iPhone release, Walt would come on the network and talk about it, and everybody listened. And I don't think anyone's really, I mean, nobody's replaced Walt since he's retired, and he's still been an incredible mentor to me. And now I wonder, because we're moving from consumer all the way to lot of these technical tools. I look at some of the newsroom when we were at CNBC. Some of the product reviewers were not as enthused, or I think there was people that want to cover the Apples or the big techs of the world wanted to be reporters that were reporting on the business and not necessarily on the product. So they were a little bit deprioritized, and I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying that.
Or maybe you're validating them. This is therapeutic.
Yeah,
They
maybe
were
it's a time for them to
underappreciated,
be
and now their time is back.
re-elevated. And like I remember when we were starting to look at different comps for different image and video models. Now there's so many different ways to do it, and just going through prompting. But we go through Chatbot Arena, which I think a lot of VCs use as one benchmark. So you look at different parameters and different metrics based on various voting cycles.
I feel like that's such like an interesting point. There was a lot of commentary around the release of Grok and how so many models are now being trained against these benchmarks. So they just perform very well against benchmarks. And you really need that, I guess we're calling it product review of Grok, to tell you how well it actually operates versus just how well it tests.
And I think if you're passive about it and you just, sort of wait to see the Twitter takedown of some of these things, you're sort of self-selecting for people who are looking for the mistakes or the hallucinations that they make. So I don't feel like, my way of saying, like, yeah, I really do think that there needs to be some sort of third party reviewer for this. And like, I mean, what do you guys think about like Marcus Brownlee and sort of influencers or folks like that who take it upon themselves?
I think they still have a role to play here. I wonder if, like, when you think about the Walt Mossbergs and sort of that earlier era, they were so needed because we were in a time of like novelty and complexity, right? There were these new devices, and actually with these devices there were new sort of ecosystems that emerged. I remember pitching Walt Mossberg on Box's iPad app because we were like very early to launch for that platform. And so it was like this new, novel, exciting thing. And people like Walt were almost gatekeepers. And then ad tech became like a little easier for the average consumer to understand, and especially like the average person in tech. I think it became more about taste and refinement. Even like the wire cutter, right? Like, who do you think has like good taste in things? And like, yes, there's sort of a comparison of like feature sets or capabilities, but a lot of it is like, what's cool. And now I think we're back in an era of like complexity and novelty where we need people to like really dig in and help us understand these platforms. Of course, it can't look like it did before, right? Because nothing is static. And so I also wonder if there's like, is there like a revival or a new product hunt for this moment? Is there going to be sort of like a new kind of approach to reviewing AI products? And then back to Marcus, eventually like AI enabled consumer hardware. I mean, the AI pin was a little bit of a false start. And he, of course, was like the person who sort of slammed that product out of the gate and sent like ripples. But I think that we're going to see like new sort of formats emerge for this moment.
I think it's also for those who don't know how product reviews are done with companies like Apple, is like, you as a product reviewer get the product X amount of weeks before, and everybody gets it at the same time. It's a very controlled setting. And then at the exact same time, the embargo drops. So everybody releases that product review. And so I think that kind of lost the like genuineness of the review. It became very mechanical and it felt very controlled. And so maybe that was one of the flaws that like the consumer products era of product reviews became. And then there was such a proliferation of various product reviewers. And so that's why you look at some of the creator product reviewers that do it on their own. I think Cleo Abrams is another one who kind of takes it into her own hands and does it in her own timeline without the guardrails of the companies telling them, this is what you can do and at this timeline. That makes it a lot more authentic. And then going to, today's era of all these new products coming out, I think one of the things I heard that really resonated when I was talking to a founder yesterday at a speaker dinner was, these agents are really great when you see like 20-second, 30-second clips online. But when agents are dealing with your finances, when you're legal or, buying a home, and there's one error that like is not something that you can, catch on a higher level, but like in the technical level you can, then you're not ready for that. But there's not enough like product reviews that go into the depths of that. I think there was, I forget, it was Gokul or somebody had mentioned, he didn't mention the name of the company, but there was a legal AI company that a firm had used, and that legal AI missed a really important court date. And so they ended up firing that legal company. And so like, we're such a nascent stage of all of it.
Yeah, and I feel like a great comment I saw on that one was that, if it was human error, you can hold somebody accountable, right? And when it's AI, it's like it's kind of it's a little more.
I guess on the flip side of that, having come from like the world of autonomous driving, it is interesting that technology is held to a different standard than humans, right? Because I don't know what company it is, but like on the whole, you could probably say that legal AI company was more accurate than a human. But it's just when the mistakes happen, where the failure happens, people just expect technology to behave differently than people do, because you could hold that person accountable, but like the most you could do is fire the person. You're not going to go after them for the full effect. But honestly, like for me, all of this AI stuff has been so confusing. Like the most productive I've been is when one of my associates like sits me down and is like, here's how you use deep research. Like these are the steps that you take. And it makes me wish that someone had done that for me in Web3, because I have like NFTs floating in the ether that I have no idea how to access at all. I don't know if you guys are.
Oh my gosh, yes. I was in the peak of NFT times. I love trying new technologies, so I bought a bunch, and to this date, don't really know how to sell them. So they're also trapped in OpenSea purgatory. If anybody wants to help me unload these, if that's even a thing anymore.
I have ashleymayer.eth, and I have no idea, like, what does that mean? Where does it exist? Could I access
Same.
it?
I have helenman.eth. I followed like the step-by-step tutorial on how to do it, felt very proud of myself, and now I don't know what.
I paid a lot in gas fees to get it, but I have no idea where it is. I think, Angela, it's such a good point, because I do think that if I may make a critique of like Web3 broadly, there wasn't a lot of interest in like helping explain the category, right? There are certainly exceptions, but it was sort of like a very insular ecosystem where people got really excited. And if you were watching from the outside, you were kind of like, I have no idea what to do or where to start. And I think with AI, we have no choice but to like explain ourselves to the world. And I do feel like tech is talking to tech a lot right now. There are very few people who are sort of the spokespeople for what's happening in AI externally. And that actually feels like a real gap that like traditional media can fill. To your point, similar to the legal story, like Jeff Fowler at Washington Post used Operator from OpenAI when it first came out. And he asked it to search for eggs, a recurring theme on this podcast. Try to show him where the cheapest eggs were in like a certain radius of his home. And instead, Operator found and purchased and had delivered eggs costing $31, and they weren't even organic. And it was just such a perfect, like, oh, this is funny. This is how a lot of people are going to like learn about Operator and like agentic AI and like what's possible. And it took someone, using a real life example to help people see both like what is possible, but also like where we are in the innovation curve. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to see who fills that gap from a media perspective. I'm excited to see which executives step up to really talk about the future of AI beyond sort of the Silicon Valley bubble to the broader world. And both of those feel like very up for grabs to me right now.
I think another thing, there's a massive opportunity for product marketing here too, right?
Yeah.
So like, I think of early days of like big consumer internet, like product tutorials and sort of like in product messaging for how to use new products was huge. And then, we call a digital native generation of young people say that they don't need those things anymore. And now I feel like that's also coming back, right? So like, my fellow marketers out there, concerned about how few jobs there are all of a sudden in startups. Like I think that more than ever, product marketing, like when I think of just even OpenAI or Anthropic, like these huge companies that, that are big employers, in tech, I just see a massive opportunity to close that education gap. And I think that it's a win-win because you need to get not the non-early adopters, right? The non-super technical people who are going to take the time to figure it out for themselves to really win, like, and get to the next milestones for growth.
100%. I mean, you go into ChatGPT and like, I think they've actually cleaned it up recently, but it used to be there were like 6 different models to choose from.
Right.
And I'm someone who is like very online and I follow this stuff. And I was like, oh, like which of these should I be using for what task? And so yeah, I totally agree. I think actually Google recently got some kudos. They launched to like a small number of people sort of their answer to ChatGPT or Perplexity. So rather than like the search bar, you ask a question, and I think they just called it like Search AI or Google AI. Like they gave it a very simple name, which was kind of refreshing when we have all of these crazy model names and releases, and it's 3.70 whatever mini. And they just went with like a very, like you want the AI version? Here's the AI version.
I'm so curious to get your guys' perspective, but I think we've known like women drive so much of the decision and purchasing power in the homes. And I feel like a lot of even the influencer marketing, as you said, Ashley, is very like tech, talking to tech, like guys talking to other developers. And I feel like there is this whole untapped opportunity of getting moms like really hooked on using ChatGPT or using Operator, like whichever company gets agentic AI right and like figures out how to market to moms, I feel like is just gonna take off because of all the purchasing power that's funneled through there.
Yeah, we invested in a company that's trying to do this, and I feel like what's interesting is that even if you have the best technology, you're still you face the same challenge that literally any company that's reaching moms does, which is how do you get in front of them, right? And once you get in front of like a critical mass or it takes off and goes viral on social media, then I think like that's going to be who wins. I mean, we keep coming back to this like what happens when the technology is commoditized. But I'm watching in real time like a couple of these AI companies that are targeting moms to help like be the central household manager and help moms with like the invisible load of managing a family. Sort of like get to that same point where we would imagine like a CPG company that's targeting moms to get to. And so a lot of things just in the end turn into like a sort of attention and distribution problem.
Yeah, I feel like the theme that we keep coming back to in a lot of our conversations when we look at companies either in the AI coding space or AI marketing is separating what technology can do and where human taste and human judgment is still required. And it reminded me of the story that TPG always tells when they first invested in J. Crew. So TPG is like the super financially oriented company. They invested in J. Crew, which is a clothing brand, and they go to the first board meeting. They're expecting to talk about like all these numbers and like what's happening, and then like the presentation is like, next year the theme is olive, and like that was like like the deck, and they're like, what do you mean the theme is olive? But like so much of what drives companies is setting that taste, setting that direction, and I think more than ever in the age of AI, humans play a huge role in setting taste and direction. And that's probably really exciting for marketers and others like yourself.
All right, we're going to go to rapid fire Q&A. So this Q&A is brought to you by Mercury. The fintech used over 200,000 startups to simplify their finances. So the first question we have this week, the best way to find a technical co-founder. And if I can ask another question, what is a fair equity split? This one's interesting. I'm curious to get your guys' perspective. I feel like, there are a lot of camps saying that being a solo founder is really hard. They prefer to see co-founders, but I think it's one of those things like a relationship, like a healthy relationship is better than being alone, but being alone is better than being in a bad relationship, right? So similarly, if you've got a great idea and you have traction and you figured out how to get something built, that could be just a fine path. If you're getting a lot of feedback, maybe from investors that they want to see a technical co-founder, I don't know, just like push on that a little bit more, rather, before you sort of like run off and try to find your technical soulmate.
Yeah, I think there are groups that help facilitate this, like South Park Commons, right? They're famously -1 to 0, and so a lot of people will go and like play around with ideas and meet people, well before they have a startup. My partner runs a company called Tribe, which she started with someone she met in South Park Commons, but they had a chance to work together and figure out if the vibe was right. So to Helen's point, I fully agree. I think any founder who's gone through a breakup will say that being solo is better than being in a bad co-founder relationship. And so, yeah, take that to heart. Don't let your investors bully you too much.
Cool. And then I think we have room for one more question. What is the best AI productivity hack you personally use? Angela, I feel like you have a bunch.
Well, I only really this is how tech illiterate I am. I only recently realized how to upload files into ChatGPT. So we were doing diligence on a company. We had like a really short timeline to turn something around. And so we uploaded a bunch of PDF files and Excel files into deep research on ChatGPT and asked them to basically do a financial analysis. And I was shocked at how in-depth and accurate the analysis was. I think they covered more ground than like a traditional associate would have. And so it was just amazing. Like it was able to correlate things on the balance sheet to what was happening on the income statement and draw those connections. So if you work in finance, you should be using deep research all the time.
Oh yeah, mine's similar. I feel like I use Claude to double check my math and like my formulas in like I'll create a fund model or I'll calculate like performance data for our portfolio and pretty basic stuff. But if you're somebody who's got this thing called math phobia, which look it up what it is, I feel totally validated. It's because I have a mom who's a mathematician and she's like a pure math person, always made me feel like I was like, not as good. I'm definitely not as good. But this has like been really helpful for that. I'll have it ingest my Excel files and I'll ask for it to check certain formulas and it'll come back and tell me why they're correct or what was the error in it. And yeah, I feel like I can't live without it.
I've done that too, less from a place of math phobia, but more from a place of like, I was an English and government major. And I have 100% had ChatGPT hallucinate stuff and do it wrong. And so just always double check and double check the work. My example is kind of a silly one. But may be responsible for saving my marriage because I no longer ask my husband if my tweet is a good tweet. I asked ChatGPT and I ask it to like poke holes or see if it even gets the joke. Because if ChatGPT can get the joke, like I think like maybe other people can. It will always take the opportunity to rewrite the tweet and make it dumber or less funny. Like it's like, here's another version. And it's like so cringe and it looks like everything you read on LinkedIn basically these days. But it's a great way to like pressure test thinking and make sure a point is coming across. And I use it for that like literally every day for writing that is both public and non-public.
Well, something even sillier, I was talking to a coworker and we were talking about like the value we get out of using ChatGPT, and he said the most recent search he did was how many helium balloons would it take to lift my dog? And he input like what breed of dog it was and how much it weighed, and he got an answer, and it just like made him really happy, and that's not something you can find elsewhere. And so
Wait, is his dog okay though? Do we need to call animal abuse? I'm a little worried.
I think it was just a hypothetical question. I
Okay.
don't think it was
Okay.
actually put into practice. But
I'm
there's
gonna
also
need some proof of life of this dog.
Another great chat. Reminder, you can submit a question at anothergreatchat.com, and we'll see you next week.